For over 100 years, battles have raged in the air for command of the skies.
If you don't have air supremacy, you're in trouble.
Since its earliest beginnings in World War I, the airplane is the supreme weapon of the armed forces.
This was a real battle for civilization, for humanity.
It revolutionized battle and changed the ways war was fought and won.
The F-117 has obviously changed how we design aircraft and air campaigns.
War drove innovation in the skies.
What we hear from the Air Force is when the F-35 wasn't there, all others died. When F-35 was there, they reigned supreme.
Aircraft bred a new kind of hero. The fate of entire nations depended on the bravery of a handful of men.
An appreciation of the extent to which young men were willing to put their lives on the line for an ideal is something we need to remember more often than we do.
In this episode, the race to build the world's first jet engine.
Frank Whittle realized that if you fly at above 30,000 feet, you can fly faster and further.
The first combat-ready jet plane that could have helped the Nazis win the war.
The Messerschmitt 262 is years ahead of its time.
The shocking Soviet fighter that blew US bombers out of the sky.
For that one moment in time, the MiG-15 was a world beater and everybody knew it.
The blisteringly fast American Sabre that held the line in the Cold War.
You had to point the nose straight down and around 30,000 feet. You said, oh, good, I'm supersonic.
Hero of the Falklands, the Great British Jump Jet.
At odds of 12 to 1, you had to be good and lucky.
The supersonic strike plane with a nose for the enemy in Vietnam and again in Desert Storm.
We were armed, alone, and unafraid.
Today, jet engines power all the world's most deadly combat planes. Compared to the first piston-powered aircraft, the advent of the jet engine was a quantum leap in aerodynamic technology. It allowed combat planes to fly faster, further, and higher than ever before.
I loved it because it was fast and fast as life.
I liked the power that it had. It had a 5-stage afterburner, which gave you plenty of power to accelerate.
The skies no longer had limits.
You're 7-some miles above the surface of the Earth. You're fully engaged the entire flight.
The jet engine let combat planes burst through the sound barrier and fly faster than a speeding bullet.
Going supersonic, you don't know you've done it. You can't hear the bang. It's just a speedo telling you you've gone past Mach 1. You're aware of the extra pressure on the flying controls, but otherwise it's just a number on a dial.
Perhaps the most iconic jet-powered fighter plane is the British Hawker Siddeley Harrier jump jet. Powered by a Rolls-Royce Pegasus jet engine, the Harrier was introduced in 1969. 4 progressive versions followed. The Harrier jump jet was famous for its extraordinary ability to take off and land vertically, a first for a combat plane.
It achieves this by 4 nozzles, which direct the exhaust of the engine straight down to operate vertically. How you actually do it is to move the throttle to half power, move the nozzles down into the vertical takeoff position, and then very quickly select full power. The engine produces 21,500 pounds of thrust to lift the aeroplane.
The Harrier jump jet was the preeminent British fighter of the Cold War era. Used by the Royal Air Force and the Army, it served in a variety of roles.
The Army needed a close air support aeroplane, which could be brought into play very quickly onto the battlefield. It then went on to be developed into an air defence fighter for the Navy.
The Harrier that we had in the Navy was mainly a fighter, but it also did the other 2 jobs extremely well, which was both reconnaissance and strike when we needed it. and that was probably the secret of its success. Multi-role, very versatile.
Used as a deterrent in the Cold War, the Harrier would soon showcase its exceptional versatility and raw jet power in combat. On April the 2nd, 1982, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, a British colony in the South Atlantic, and war was declared. The British task force sent to reclaim the islands, 8,000 miles away, consisted of 28,000 men, over 100 ships, and over 160 aircraft, including 38 Harrier jump jets.
The main requirement was to achieve air superiority, so that the ships could operate safely, and in order to do that, you had to be sure that they wouldn't be attacked.
When the task force arrived in the South Atlantic, the British declared a 200-mile exclusion zone around the islands. If the Argentinian forces entered, they would be attacked. But in the sky, the odds were heavily stacked against Robin Kent's jump jet squadron.
We had 20 aircraft and they had 240. So we were concerned that at odds of 12 to 1, you had to be good and lucky.
Though vastly outnumbered, the British Harrier pilots were well prepared for their dangerous and deadly mission.
We developed tactics that we thought would be sufficient to take them in a hook attack.
Key to the strategy was enticing the Argentinian pilots to drop in altitude to meet the British fighters. The Harriers operated in pairs. When one of the Argentinian Mirages dropped down to attack one of the Harriers, the second British jet would hook around the back of the Mirage.
And one is now able to laterally come in, probably blind, and to take a stern shot.
May the 1st, 1982, the British launched an assault to liberate the Argentinian-held capital of the islands, Port Stanley. Then, a senior pilot, Robin Kent and his Harrier squadron were in the air when they spotted the enemy.
The first pair of Mirage 3s came in. My wingman and I engaged them, and we were going to set up exactly that hook maneuver. We subsequently realized they were not going to come down. We ran in. They came to within about 10 miles, jettisoned their tanks, and started to turn for home. That happened again on the second sortie, likewise the third sortie. On the fourth sortie, they descended and started to engage almost immediately. And Flight Lieutenant Barton shot down one of the Mirage 3s. At the end of day one, we had 5 confirmed kills.
Thanks to the Harrier jump jet's power and versatility, British pilots were able to distinguish themselves in the war with Argentina over the Falkland Islands. They flew 1,561 sorties, shot down 22 enemy aircraft with the loss of 5 Harriers and tragically 1 British crew member. Accidents claimed the lives of 3 further British crewmen. The cornerstone of the Harrier jump jet's combat success was its powerful Rolls-Royce engine. And for that, thanks are due to a 21-year-old British Royal Air Force cadet who sparked the jet age, Frank Whittle. It was the young pilot who invented the jet engine. The giant leap into a new age began less than a century ago in the 1920s.
Frank Whittle came from a very humble background. He joined the RAF at the age of 16 as a fitter apprentice, and he also became a pilot, a very good test pilot.
Frank Whittle wrote his revolutionary thesis, Future Developments in Aircraft Design, in 1928.
He was about 20 when he came up with this. The key thing that Frank Whittle realized was that the higher you go in altitude, then the air gets much thinner. At above 30,000 feet, you can fly faster and further with less fuel. At a time when the fastest aircraft in the RAF were only flying at around about 350 miles an hour, Whittle envisaged a new fighter that would fly at least 500 miles an hour.
His concept of the turbojet engine was relatively simple. At the front end, air is sucked into the engine. There it's squeezed by the compressor, creating higher pressure air. which then passes into the combustion chamber and is ignited. Hot air blasts out the back, producing thrust. As the turbine blades rotate, they turn the shaft, drawing in yet more air. Now all Whittle needed was some funding to build a jet engine and test his theory. But the young engineer had a problem.
The air ministry wasn't interested. People just could not believe you could have a machine that could basically double the performance of the very best piston engine. It's too good to believe.
Undeterred, in 1930, Whittle took out a patent on his jet engine design himself. Meanwhile, 500 miles away, in the heart of Germany, a young engineer, Hans von Ohain, had secretly set to work building a jet-propelled engine.
The UK wasn't aware of all these developments in Germany. It was kept secret. Von Ohain admitted in his own biography that he studied the work of Frank Whittle, his ideas for a jet engine. This was in the public domain.
British aero engineer Frank Whittle had finally secured some private funding in 1935, and he formed Jet Powers Limited, a company dedicated to building jet engines. The German engineer found funding too. Hans von Ohain's support was from an impressive source.
Unlike in the UK, where nobody in officialdom really wanted to know, in Germany they were very receptive, and the Heinkel aeroplane company became very interested in the potential of jet power, supported by the German government.
By April 1937, von Ohain had fabricated his first test jet engine, but it would take many more months to find the right fuel and mix to make it work and not blow up the engine. The British faced the same problem, but that same month, on April the 12th, 1937, Frank Whittle won the race.
That was the sort of magic moment that actually was the birth of the jet engine. Frank Whittle was the first person who actually designed what we now know as a jet engine.
Now the race was on to build the world's first jet-powered combat plane. Days after Whittle, Hans von Ohain in Germany also successfully ran his first jet engine, and then set to work building a jet-propelled plane. At the same time, Frank Whittle was grounded.
The Air Ministry didn't really want to spend money on an unknown, unquantifiable new technology. Industry was happy just making piston engines. They were trying to build as many Spitfires and Hurricanes and other aircraft because they anticipated there might be a war within a few years. They didn't want to waste time.
Meanwhile, in Germany, on August the 27th, 1939, the Heinkel HE-178 took flight. The German physicist Hans von Ohain booked a place in the history books next to Frank Whittle. The jet age had arrived.
After the war, Whittle and Ohain both ended up in the United States in retirement, and they got to know each other and they became friends. Whittle, his lasting legacy to the world is he transformed the world with the jet engine.
4 days later, on September the 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland and World War II had begun. Frank Whittle now got all the funding he needed. On the 15th of May 1941, with a Powerjet's WI turbojet engine, the Gloucester E-28-39 Pioneer took to the skies.
The invention of the jet engine has been described as the most significant invention of the 20th century. It totally revolutionized aviation. It consolidated the position of aviation as the most important weapon in war.
But in the fervid quest for faster, higher and deadlier planes to dominate the skies in World War II, it was the Germans who streaked ahead. For years after their famous losses in the Battle of Britain, the Germans had radically redesigned their frontline fighter planes. And in 1944, they introduced the Messerschmitt Me 262.
The Messerschmitt 262 is the world's first operational jet fighter, and as such, it's years ahead of its time. The key attribute of the 262, of course, is its speed.
Powered by two Junkers Jumo turbojet engines, the ME-262 had an operational ceiling of over 37,000 feet, a climb rate of over 3,500 feet a minute, and a blistering top speed of 541 miles per hour.
The 262 is effectively about 100 miles an hour faster than the Allied piston-engined aircraft that are flying up against it. They simply can't catch it in a straight run.
The secret to its speed was not only the two turbojet Junkers engines. The ME-262 also had unique wings that were swept back from the fuselage. It was so effective that all the jet fighter planes that followed also featured a swept wing.
The leading edge of the wing is swept several degrees, anywhere from 11 degrees to 45 or 60 degrees, depending on the design of the aircraft.
In contrast, the first combat planes, more concerned with stability and maneuverability, all featured straight wings.
Up until the advent of the jet, almost every aircraft design was straight wing, straight with the body of the aircraft, or the fuselage. Starting with two wings, in some cases three, all the way through towards the end of World War II, until the Germans introduced the first 262 jets into combat.
So the main armament of the 262 is its four 30mm cannons. It also has provision for 12 air-to-air rockets under each wing.
One of the ME-262's most successful missions came in the closing months of the war.
On the 18th of March 1945, the 262 probably has its best day when 37 262s intercept over 1,000 American bombers heading towards Berlin in very bad weather. It must have been pretty horrifying for the B-17 crews because 262s are flying way too fast. They cannot get a bead on them. The P-51s escorting them can't catch them.
The German ME-262s had won the day.
They managed to knock out 24 B-17s, a number of their escort fighters for the loss of two 262s.
In all, the ME-262s claim to have downed 509 Allied aircraft in World War II. But the German fighter jet came too late to make a real difference for the Nazis.
The 262 is sometimes described as Hitler's jet. He had great faith in what it could do to turn around the war, but in fact it was really introduced far too late for that. By that time, the skies are swarming with American aircraft, so as well as the 262 can perform, it's just completely overwhelmed in the sky.
By the 2nd of September 1945, World War II was over. But the race to build the fastest and most deadly jet-powered combat planes had just begun. In the 1950s, a new conflict was heating up, one that would pit the United States of America against the Soviet Union, the Cold War. They first faced off in Korea, Southeast Asia. The pre-war Japanese colony had been occupied since the Second World War by the two superpowers and was split in half.
The Korean Peninsula is effectively divided between the communist north and the non-communist south.
Korea was divided on the geographical 38th parallel line, and Russia was put in control of the northern part of Korea and China and the People's Liberation Army. In the south, you've got the South Koreans now governed and controlled by the United States and their thinking and politics. And from that point, there was a rumbling of dispute over who would actually control the whole of the Korean territory.
On June the 25th, 1950, the North Koreans crossed the line.
In 1950, the North Korean peoples started to move south, started to move across the 38th parallel. So at that point, the first combats of the Cold War had actually begun.
Within 2 months, before the US could muster its forces, the South Korean army had been pushed into a corner of the country, an enclave called the Pusan Perimeter. But like all modern wars, dominance of the skies was key to victory. To do that, the US and its UN allies needed to field the biggest and fastest planes with the most powerful engines that they could muster. The US fightback came in the autumn of 1950. It was spearheaded in the air by the Boeing B-29 Stratofortress, the piston-powered bomber that just a few years earlier helped end World War II. In September, US-led United Nations forces landed en masse at Incheon, and thanks to close air support, they drove the communists back to the borders of China.
You could say that America had air superiority with the strategic bombing to start with. The B-29s and their long range and their very, very capable air crews and pilots and their very, very heavily armed aircraft. Having been used to completely uninterrupted bombing runs, suddenly this new something had attacked them and passed them. The gunners on station in the B-29 haven't even seen the aircraft coming, couldn't recognize what it was. The pilot of the B-29 couldn't identify what it was. It was there and gone and passed them so fast. What had just happened in those few terrifying seconds began to dawn on them that we must actually now have MiG-15s fighting against us, and that was a pretty terrifying prospect for anybody in the B-29.
In the race for aerial supremacy, the communists and their MiGs had just burst into the lead.
The MiG-15 shocks the aviation world. Nobody is quite prepared to see the swept-wing, ultra-sleek, fast, maneuverable MiG-15 as it arrives in Korea. So this was a huge, huge jump forward. The revolutionary step change of the MiG is harnessing the heart of any jet aircraft, which is its jet engine itself. The very powerful Klimov RD-45 motor inside the MiG was really what made the difference.
In the Soviet-built MiG-15s, the powerful Klimov turbojet engine nearly doubled the average combat plane's top speed. At 668 miles per hour, the MiG was a world beater.
The MiG-15 is capable of speeds of just under Mach 1. What the MiG-15 essentially does is it takes a new swept-wing design, very efficient for high subsonic speeds, and it marries that with a heavy armament, a 37mm cannon and two 23mm cannons, as well as a reliable jet engine. So when it hits the skies over Korea, the B-29s are really in trouble.
The B-29s had pretty much unmolested access over that airspace and could carry out strategic bombing very, very effectively until the MiG-15 arrives. It can go to 50,000 feet ultimate ceiling. These aircraft could now swoop in and make very, very effective attacks on the B-29s.
And initially in the war, these MiG-15s are actually flown by Russian pilots, highly experienced World War II veterans. So they are well akin to aerial warfare, and they're causing havoc.
Tuesday, October the 23rd, 1951. A squadron of 9 US Air Force B-29s left their base in Okinawa, Japan, en route to Namsi, a North Korean airfield.
It was an airfield under development, and I needed to take that out. So they were en route when they were pounced on in that area called MiG Alley. This was the area of airspace which led in across North Korea, along the Yalu River, and alongside the Chinese border. It was the area where MiGs would wait on station at high altitude, waiting for the incoming B-29 bombers to start forming up to move in over North Korea. And at that point, the MiGs would pounce. So anybody in that area in a B-29 soon became very vulnerable.
Only able to reach a top speed of 365 miles per hour, the big American bombers were no match for the lightning-fast MiGs. The Americans would call this day Black Tuesday.
The MiG-15s could now dive down and attack the B-29 in waves, completely unhindered to attack the B-29 forces at will. On that fateful day, on Black Tuesday, 6 of the 9 B-29 fortresses were taken down in that one raid alone. Devastating blow to the B-29 forces. For that one moment in time, the MiG-15 was a world beater, and everybody knew it.
Incredibly, the secret behind the MiG's success was that the Klimov engine was, in actuality, a Rolls-Royce jet engine in all but name. Keen to thaw Anglo-Soviet relations and given assurance that the engines were for non-military use, British Prime Minister Clement Attlee gave Soviet leader Joseph Stalin a batch of Rolls-Royce Nene engines and a license to replicate them.
Now, Stalin's response to this is, who would be so stupid? But the Brits are apparently only too happy to offer this engine.
The Soviet version was renamed the Klimov RD-45.
And a few years later, it's that Rolls-Royce Nene engine that is powering the MiG-15 over the Crimean Peninsula, shooting down UN aircraft.
To win the war, the Americans and their UN allies, among them Britain, France and Australia, first had to dominate the skies. To do that, they needed to best the MiGs urgently. So they radically improved their own jet fighter, the F-86 Sabre.
The Americans had started development of the F-86, and then it was rushed into production and rushed to Korea.
The F-86 is actually very similar to the MiG-15. It has that single-engine swept-wing design. The one key difference between the two is, rather than the heavy cannon armament of the MiG-15, the F-86 is armed with 6 50 caliber machine guns. So we're talking about just getting more lead in the air, really, for the American aircraft.
Powered by a General Electric J-47 turbojet engine, the final version of the F-86, deployed in Korea, had 5,200 pounds of thrust and a top speed of 678 miles per hour. That made it faster than the MiG. And in a dive, the American F-86 could go supersonic, faster than the speed of sound.
This is the North American F-86 Sabre jet, built in 1952. They made just under 10,000 F-86s in various models.
With each model of the F-86 came technological upgrades designed to give American pilots the combat edge.
This is an iconic airplane. You know, it was a groundbreaker in many ways. This was the first swept-wing jet that the Allies had.
With its wings swept back to 35 degrees, the extreme buffering experienced as a plane nears supersonic speeds is dissipated, and the plane's wings allow it to achieve Mach speed and slice through the sound barrier.
You had to get up to 40,000 feet, turn over upside down, and point the nose straight down, and around 30,000 feet, you finally went through the speed of sound, and you said, oh, good, I'm supersonic.
For sheer speed, the American F-86 Sabre now had the edge over the Soviet MiG. But the MiG had greater mobility and could still outclimb the Sabre. In an aerial dogfight, those abilities were vital.
The F-86 developed very quickly, which the US knew it had to do to keep up with combating the MiG.
In the battle to beat the MiG, the American designers ingeniously modified the Sabre's tail section.
The original F-86 was fairly stock. Then someone came up with the brilliant notion of the flying tail, with the E and the F models, the whole horizontal stabilizer moving.
Outfitted with a unique flying tail, the American Sabre was now far more maneuverable, and most importantly, it could outrun, outroll, and outdive the MiG.
If I were looking at a straight match between the aircraft, I think the F-86 might have a slight edge given that it can dive through Mach 1 and the MiG can't do that.
It's a great delight to fly. The thrust of the engine versus the weight of the aircraft is very advantageous. So it's very light and quick.
It was truly one of the last fun airplanes to fly, I think.
The Sabre jet was stripped to the bone for action.
It's not a highly pressurized cockpit, and you must be on oxygen all the time. 50% of the atmosphere of the Earth is gone by 18,000 feet. So in the 40s, it's extremely thin. It's a very hostile atmospheric environment. Temperatures down to 40 and 50 degrees Celsius below zero.
With major Allied US and UN bombing raids strategically pounding North Korean targets, the F-86 task was to provide bomber protection for runs along MiG Alley.
The MiGs would come in as high as 50,000 feet and jump the F-86 fighters, who were at their maximum altitude of 45,000 feet. And then the fight would start.
An F-86 US Air Force pilot during the Korean War, Jim Shelton, has first-hand experience of the Sabre's awesome firepower.
It had 6 50 caliber machine guns, and when you're coming down at a target and you squeeze the trigger, you thought the airplane stood still while the guns were firing.
Powered by a supersonic turbojet engine, the new American F-86F turned the tables on their Cold War adversaries. The numbers are debatable, but by the end of the Korean conflict, the US and Allied UN F-86 pilots claimed to have shot down as many as 792 MiGs for a loss of only 78 Sabres.
By the end of the war, the F-86 pretty much holds sway in the skies over Korea.
The MiG-15 could probably outperform. It could climb faster than the F-86. It's just that our pilots were so much more skilled.
But air power and pilots on their own couldn't win the Korean War. On July the 27th, 1953, an armistice agreement was signed. It permanently divided the country in two, north and south, along the 38th parallel. By 1960, the Cold War between the USSR and the United States was heating up again, and both sides were rapidly rearming to gain the advantage. Once again, a new generation of jet engine was about to play a pivotal role in the outcome. The American Air Force needed a low-flying supersonic bomber, and the US Navy wanted a fighter jet it could launch off an aircraft carrier to protect its ships. The answer? The General Dynamics F-111 Aardvark strike plane.
It was the Cadillac of the fleet. That's how I used to call it. For its role, for interdiction, long range, it was a Cadillac.
Of the many standout features, the F-111 was the first aircraft to have a swing or variable geometry wing.
The F-111, the swing wings from 16 degrees to 72 degrees, sweep back. The swing wing on the F-111 gave you the capability to go fast for attack mode or slow for landing, and it was excellent.
To generate maximum lift at takeoff, the wings are set at a 16-degree angle away from the aircraft's fuselage.
After airborne gear flaps up all that, we went to 26, which was a good little cruising altitude. But then when we went down, we would usually swing to 45.
At high altitudes, and to go supersonic, the wings are swept back a full 72 degrees. At the heart of the F-111's peerless power, the Pratt & Whitney TF30 P111, the world's first turbofan afterburning engine.
It had 2 of them, and it had about 18,000 pounds of thrust per engine.
It had twin engines, which gave you redundancy if indeed you lost one, which occurred to me one time when I had oil line failure and I had to shut an engine down.
A turbofan has a turbojet engine at its core. What makes it more powerful is an additional chamber surrounding the core. a huge fan draws air in. Squeezed, it then enters the combustor where it's ignited. The fan also sends air through a large cylinder that wraps around the core. The extra air cools the engine and reduces noise. But most importantly, in the F-111, its turbofan produces much more thrust. This made it quiet, fast, and deadly. At low altitude, the F-111 could fly at speeds of Mach 1.2, over 150 miles an hour faster than the speed of sound. And at high altitude, a blistering Mach 2.5. In addition to raw power, the extra fuel efficiency provided by the two turbofan engines extended the F-111's range.
It had an excellent long-range capability of about 2,500 nautical miles unrefueled.
When the US increased its military presence in Vietnam in the mid-1960s, they deployed the F-111s. In 1972, they were tasked with destroying North Vietnamese airfields in what was known as the linebacker raids.
In Vietnam, it was called Whispering Death because they could not see it at night or in the weather. They couldn't hear it. It was going so fast. By the time they heard it, they couldn't get their guns around or get a lock. We were armed, alone, and unafraid. In Vietnam, it found its niche in life. It was so fast and low, it could fly at night and in the weather.
The F-111 had a state-of-the-art, all-terrain tracking radar system, which allowed it to hug the ground. And it was a clue to its inauspicious moniker, the Aardvark.
The Aardvark, which is an anteater, you can tell when you look at the F-111 how the nose looks like it's snooping along the ground, just like an anteater does, looking for ants, sniffing for targets.
To me, it's the biggest thing. The terrain-following radar, which looked vertically, and it had another radar similar. It was called Situation Awareness Radar, when it looked horizontally.
The American F-111's combat record in Vietnam was outstanding. It flew 4,000 missions, and only 6 Aardvarks were lost. When in 1990 Saddam Hussein's Iraqi army invaded Kuwait, it ignited the Gulf War. Jet-powered combat planes were about to prove more decisive than ever. The F-111s were once again called into action. On January the 17th, 1991, Operation Desert Storm was launched. Among the US and coalition assets, 66 F-111 strike planes. Its all-terrain radar and ground-hugging abilities made it ideal for Desert Storm.
It was to take out mainly the air defense sites, destroy the airfields. That was its main purpose.
Retooled for a new war with digitally enhanced laser-guided munitions, the upgraded F-111s were at the tip of the spear.
So when it went into combat, it had not only conventional bombs, laser-guided bombs as well.
During Desert Storm, the American F-111s were sent to take out command and control centers. For what would be a concrete-busting mission, they carried an extraordinary payload.
There was a bomb called the GBU-28, and it was a 5,000-pound bomb designed for that F-111. Bunker buster.
After decimating the Iraqis' command and communication centers, the F-111s were redirected to tank-busting duty, tasked with taking out armored vehicles.
And they would drop these laser-guided bombs. Right down the line, laser designating and dropping one bomb, one target. So it destroyed or immobilized much of their armor. It was very effective.
Operation Desert Storm ended on February the 28th, 1991, and the American F-111 Aardvarks had excelled. In all, they flew over 5,000 missions in Iraq, and they destroyed over 1,500 tanks and armored vehicles. The last F-111 to serve was retired in 2010. It's earned a place in the pantheon of great jet-powered combat planes that have revolutionized aerial warfare. And it was all thanks to Frank Whittle and his invention of the jet engine.
The jet engine was invented in the early 1940s. What did that change? Suddenly, the performance, the speed of aeroplanes increased significantly. The big difference is you get there faster, therefore, in a given period of time, you can go further.
Today, there are some 20,000 military jets actively being flown by air forces around the world. With aerodynamic technology constantly being perfected and reimagined, the promise is that with each new generation of jet engines, combat planes will fly even further, faster, and engage adversaries with ever-increasing ferocity well into the 21st century.